Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is Friday. We've been in the book of Proverbs this week, and today we're in Proverbs 19. I'm with Jay Rivenbark and Chris Rexroad. We're going to examine this chapter. It says, better to be poor and honest than to be dishonest and a fool. Enthusiasm without knowledge is no good. Haste makes mistakes. People ruin their lives by their own foolishness and then are angry at the Lord. Wealth makes many friends, poverty drives them away. A false witness will not go unpunished, nor will a liar escape. Many seek favors from a ruler. Everyone is the friend of a person who gives gifts. The relatives of the poor despise them. How much more will their friends avoid them? Though poor plead with them, their friends are gone. To acquire wisdom is to love yourself. People who cherish understanding will prosper. A false witness will not go unpunished, and a liar will be destroyed. It isn't right for a fool to live in luxury or for a slave to rule over princes. So let me just stop there and dive into the question that I want to ask. With power comes much responsibility. What role does wisdom play in things like justice and rulers and ruling and power and leaders? There are numerous. Proverbs is filled with conversations about this. This has several verses that talk about ruling and things that shouldn't happen and should happen. What role does wisdom play in justice and ruling and power?
It plays a big role, and you definitely want it to be there because most situations aren't black and white, and you have to weigh in on one situation. Like, let's say you have let's just go straightforward justice here. You have a first-time offender coming in for stealing something. Well, you're not going to hopefully throw the book at them. You're going to want to try to find a way to correct them and restore them, but with some form of punishment. Now, if this is their 17th offense, they're obviously not learning their lesson and they can't be trusted. They're going to get hit with something harder. So trying to use the wisdom of not just serving a punishment here for a wronging, but hopefully wanting to restore or rehabilitate a person if they're willing to.
But even before you get to that application, as it relates to justice, wisdom seeks truth, seeks to understand. Because you can have truth as it relates to justice, and we're talking about court, as we're right now for a moment. You can have truth. Somebody could have committed this act or offense, but when you understand the totality of the circumstances, it's addressed or handled different than this person over here may have been charged with the same offense, but the surrounding circumstances are such that even the punishment is different for the same two offenses, because wisdom has sought out information to be able to make a decision and how to respond appropriately. Doesn't mean you give them a free pass on it, but even punishment requires wisdom.
I have a random question for you.
Uh-oh.
It being from law enforcement, have you ever charged somebody and been wrong?
I think I can honestly answer that. No. Have charged a few people through the years that you felt really, really bad about charging them for, and even advocated to the court on their behalf. Okay?
Why?
An example would be, let's say they had committed an offense that people knew about it and they had reported it, and therefore you responded to that, and then you're committed, you're obligated at that point. If it's public knowledge, there was something that occurred and somebody reported it. Now there are some things that are.
You mean your ability to give your discretion goes away?
Well, yeah, not all of it, not all. But I'm saying there are certain parameters, certain things where you can use discretion. You can have a conversation. You can educate. There's some things that perhaps a warning ticket would be appropriate. Then there's some things that require a higher level of involvement. But because of the way you learned about it, it limited your discretion even more, and so therefore you had to make some decisions. But there have been a few times where you kind of tugged at your heart, and even made sure that the prosecuting district attorney understood the totality of it, and really you were advocating on their behalf. You know, you had a job and a responsibility, but at the same time you wanted them to understand and to make this as fair a situation as you could for the individual.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you don't want to walk around with the mentality of just every time somebody does something wrong, throw them in jail. I mean, you want to help people correct if possible. But on another part of your question, it talks about ruling, you know, that type of wisdom that we need in our government systems. I mean, they need to have the wisdom to make choices that don't just benefit them or this particular time, but the wisdom to see is this beneficial for the future of our country or the future of our state or something like that. Anybody that's in those positions that rule and make those decisions need to be thinking about bigger picture things.
And that application applies even to the church, you know, and how we
Mhm.
conduct business. You know, it'd be so easy to mete out justice based on our perception rather than gathering necessary information, having compassion, finding a course correction that benefits people rather than just bringing judgment. You know, the ability to rule, looking at a bigger picture process, not abusing authority and power, and all those things are applicable even in the church world.
I have this is a non-Bible question. It's just a random conversation that I had recently with a caseworker about a specific thing that the recidivism rate for certain crimes is pretty high, meaning they're going to go back and commit the crime again and go back to jail. It's pretty high. So I was having this conversation with a caseworker about a specific issue, and she was talking about the need for ongoing management for sexual predators. That's how she put it. Ongoing management. Like when they get out of jail, there has to be a lifetime of ongoing management. But she said the recidivism rate was really, really low for sexual predators. I found it interesting because we're talking about people going to jail, and what you want them to do is to learn to do right. We don't seem to be, it seems like the ongoing management for robbery and drug use and murder and physical abuse is jail. Like that's the ongoing management of it that we tend to have. Either they get out and they're on their own once they are off parole, and then when they do it again, we arrest them and go back. But we manage sexual predators once they get out. Do you think that has anything to do with the lower recidivism rates, or are they just smarter, or do they? I don't know. I'm just curious. I'm sure you both have opinions or experience. Jay?
Well, a rebuttal to that, I would say that maybe that's not as clear cut as what it sounds like, in that if a person goes to jail/prison for whether it be armed robbery or murder, there are a multitude, a host of programs that are available to people if they choose to make themselves available to
Are
it.
they required?
No.
But they are required for certain sexual predators.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think that comes into play. And so I don't have any numbers to offer you, but I know there's probably some out there where we could look and see people who have chosen to apply themselves to certain programs, better education, job training, even while incarcerated.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Well,
you know,
the Church of the Highlands has a ministry to prisons in Alabama, and the recidivism rate of a person who goes through their program while they're incarcerated is less than 1%. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's significant.
So,
which points out, you know, we've talked about wisdom all week. You know, even the individual who has been in that lifestyle that may be incarcerated, particularly long-term incarceration, you know, if wisdom will say, when and if I get another opportunity, I need to make some preparation on my end while I have this chance. And for a large part of the population, it would seem that that is not a thought process. I'm just going to live in the moment. Whatever happens, happens. And that is the revolving door.
And I would say in those cases, the wisdom, or maybe you may agree or disagree. It seems to me that many of them in those situations, the wisdom, the lacking piece of wisdom is the circle that they find themselves in when they are removed from prison or jail.
Mm-hmm.
That causes them to repeat the behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah. If they go right back into an environment that fosters that, that's a part of it, then there's almost 100% likelihood they're going to fall right back into that. And we talk a lot about small groups, life groups, why they're so important. And we may not be dealing with those issues, but the reality is the people you surround yourself with, your support group that you have in place, has a lot to do with your success in life, whether it's, not following this sin, this temptation, this struggle. And that can look like a lot of things. And so, that is extremely important.
So one of the verses here, it says in verse 6, many seek favors from a ruler. Everyone is a friend of a person who gives gifts. Wisdom, a piece of wisdom when you're in power, a ruler, a leader, is knowing who to help and who not to help, how much to help, how not to help. In the context of like being a parent, I think there are times where I thought I was helping my kids, I was hurting them. And it wasn't the wisest thing to do. But here, like one of the places that I think is the biggest challenge is in benevolence. Who do we help? Who do we not help? And once people, and pretty much everybody in the community knows that we help people, and they, and it goes through spells. Like we can go weeks and not get a benevolence request, and then all of a sudden it's like every day, for a period of time. How does wisdom play into things like benevolence, personal benevolence, church benevolence, governmental benevolence? Because there are very few, in my opinion, and I have a pretty strong opinion about this that I vocalize frequently, there are very few people less equipped to make wise judgments about benevolence than the government. Right? In order for the government to do it, they've got to have a structure that is so broad and flimsy that just really
their filter isn't very effective.
That's right. It's not very good. It's not very discerning.
Yes,
it's much better on a one-on-one basis. But how does a church or a church is what we're talking about? How does a church use better judgment about being benevolent and who do I help and who do I not help?
I definitely would say that if you don't already have a connection with that person, that you need to develop a connection with that person, have a sit-down conversation. And that right there will filter out a lot of people that are just looking for some sort of a quick handout or something. We're called to help all kinds of people, but we're also to be wise with the resources that God's given us. So having those conversations, and then also putting people in place that have good forms of discernment, that can kind of separate out the emotional to the logical and stuff like that, to make a wise decision to not only help that person, but to help that person get back onto their feet and moving forward, and to figure out if that person is wanting to do that as well.
Yeah, I know one of the things that at this church where we all serve at is we have some expectation of people to provide information to us. You said we want to dig a little bit deeper, and it's not to offend people, but we want to know, one, it is a legitimate need, that you're not in this place either the first time or the 21st time, by poor choices and decisions. If you are, then there's a much bigger problem, and we have ways that we offer help through that as well. But we need some basic information, to to learn a little bit about you. You mentioned relationship. We look to serve people directly associated with the church first, and then work out from there. And there is a limited amount of resources and budget available for that. I don't think it will ever cease to amaze me the numbers of people who ask for help, benevolence, whatever title you want to put on it. But when you start asking the first or second or third question, that would just bail on you or get angry with you. And it becomes apparent pretty quick, what the motive is behind that, whether you're looking just for free handouts or whether you got a legitimate need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, patterns are something that you have to look for.
Yep.
Is that's important. The last thing I wanted to touch on, because it mentions it 3 or 4 times in this chapter, is a false witness. Why are false witnesses such a threat to justice?
Because they can so easily pervert justice in that, we talked about a court analogy earlier. You have a false witness come in. They can ruin somebody's life from a criminal standpoint, from a civil standpoint. For me, on a personal level, a person who is not trustworthy has proven themselves to be a false witness. To me, they just lose all credibility at that point. And then if you're associated with that person at a certain level, if you're not careful, at least the perception of some people, their lack of honesty and integrity will bleed over to you by association if you're not careful. So it has,
you'll lose credibility.
Yeah, it has a lot of tentacles attached to it.
Yeah, and in interpersonal relationships, in a court, they're just so devastating.
It is. I think it's one of the reasons why in the Old Testament, a capital offense, and they had a lot of them back then. Their list was a lot longer than what ours is as far as capital offenses. But one of the things they had in there, it required the witness of 2 or 3 or more persons. They weren't going to just take somebody's life even based on one.
Last year we talked about the flaw of an eyewitness. Like an eyewitness is probably
that's
at least 50% wrong.
I wouldn't be far from that. Yeah.
And there's nothing more discouraging. I've never been in court where that happened. I've never been in court for some situation like that where somebody lied on the stand. But I've been in some interpersonal relationships and some corporate meetings where somebody had said one thing in private, and then when they got in a group in time to say it in public, they told something completely different. You're like, you're making everybody's life miserable right now by doing that. So,
yeah.
Any other thoughts on Proverbs in general, or this particular proverb that you want to make sure we hit?
No, I really like the book of Proverbs. It's one of the ones you mentioned it in one of the earlier podcasts, that if I'm struggling with what I'm going to learn from or go back to or something, I typically default to Proverbs just because it just has it adds a lot of good value to your life just by reading like one per day or accompanying it with something else. So
there's not a major category in our lives that's not addressed in some form or fashion in the book of Proverbs. And if you should read the entire Bible and make it a practice, but if there's one area you're going to drill down on repeatedly, Proverbs is probably the place to go.
Well, thank you for joining us this week on our conversation about Proverbs. Hope you'll be back Monday as we continue our journey through the Bible and one single story.